And it's only been a couple of weeks since we've been over the $30 barrier. How long do you think they will wait before they realize that perhaps, I guess what I'm trying to work out is, do you think the price will drop and fall back again if there's not some more imminent movement by the utilities? If they do sit back and wait and trying to work out what is going on, get a feel for this, do you think that the price will drop again? I think that'll send negative messages into the market, or do you think that the impetus will be sustainable?
Well, you know what? That's a great question, and I think unfortunately one that's really unknowable right now, because there's too many players that it's contingent upon their activities, and let's face it, most prominently is Kazakhstan. It's nice to see them suspend operations, albeit for only a 3-month period of time. We'll certainly take it. By their calculations, they believe that's going to bring that will reduce their overall 2020 production by about 10.4 million pounds. We would love to see that. Whether or not, if they restart production, or if this turns into a very short-term shutdown of all of these facilities. Remember, you've got 7 of the 10 largest uranium producers in the world currently shut in. 7 of 10. So, it just depends largely on what the Kazakhs do, but I think it's a little more difficult if you're Cameco to shut down a Cigar Lake and then reopen it in a flash. I mean, you're laying off a lot of people. It takes a 6 months period of time to even recover the severances that you gave them usually. So typically a shutdown of that size does not come back on right away. A state-owned enterprise like the joint ventures that the Kazakhs have, that's a bit different. This could be something that could be short-lived, but again, I think that there's too much going on at the federal level with the United States government, well,
let's talk about that.
Along the lines of
let's talk about that, Jeff. Let's talk about that, because there's rumors. Working group. What do you know?
What I've heard, and this is a rumor, so let me qualify that, is that we could see something out of the working group this week. Now we've heard that many times before. That's I hate even saying anything about that or passing it along, but it does make some sense. And as we were discussing prior, there is right now an incentive, and there is, I think, a mindset among a number of the agencies, whether that be commerce, energy, or defense, or members of Congress, high-ranking members of Congress, that are paying very close attention to this, that a more holistic approach needs to be taken. And of course, that's what the working group is all about, is that we're not just looking at the uranium producers, we're going to look at the entire fuel cycle. Well, if you're going to do that, then you have to look at not just the recommendations or the report that the working group is going to release and what recommendations that might provide or what relief that might provide. You also have to be looking at the Russian suspension agreement, which comes up for expiration at the end of this year. But then in addition to that, there is draft legislation out there by Senators Barrasso out of Wyoming and Heinrich out of New Mexico that will call for substantially lower levels of imports coming in from Russia under the suspension agreement, and they would decline each year after that. So it makes some sense that you would want to get that report out there if you're going to look at these things in the aggregate and say, okay, how do we preserve the fuel cycle? What makes sense for the entire industry? So would I normally believe that they would come out with the report in the midst of battling the coronavirus and the economy being shut down? No, I would not. Do I think that it's possible that they would need to, so that they could make it part of a larger strategy that would include some of these multiple phases of these stimulus packages, so that you can, in effect, preserve the entire fuel cycle, and you have to have the recommendations of the working group to know what they're thinking and how they intend to go about that? That I can see that. So whether or not we'll get anything this week, I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. We are talking government after all. But I'm happy to hear that we may see something soon. And we were, let's face it, before the lockdown, we were promised by the Secretary of Energy that it would be out that day or the next day. And unfortunately, that week turned into a week where so many things just deteriorated with respect to the COVID-19 and the economic shutdowns and all that it meant. So,
of course, and
we wait.
So it's not just utilities that perhaps are going to be nervous about this. We'll use £46 million coming out of the market. It's the US government seeing what COVID is doing across the board. There's this huge, never seen before type of huge stimulus package which the US is implementing. And I guess there's a lot of hands being held out to get a piece of that, right? So energy security, obviously critical to them. Do you think that this has been what they needed, the kind of kick up the butt that they needed to kind of get their plans in order?
Well, I think it is, and as we were starting to go down the road of talking about their inventories, look, in November, very beginning of November, I attended the NEI conference in Nashville where you had a representative of the Department of Energy there talking about the current status of domestic inventories in the United States. And they were talking about how 2 years earlier, the U.S. utilities had in-house inventories of 2.9 years, which is the way they express it. And that now, at that time, at the beginning of November, it was now at 2.1 years. And you got to think that over the last 5 months, that has declined a bit. So you're probably at no more than 2 years. You may even be at under 2 years of inventory for the utilities. So they have chosen to consume their own inventories rather than go into the market. How long you can continue to do that, I don't know. And for the 2 years prior to that, well, the reason why the utilities weren't in the market was ostensibly because they were awaiting the outcome of Section 232. Well, then, of course, Section 232 morphs into the working group. Then you've got the Russian suspension agreement that's coming up for renewal and expiration. And then, of course, you've got the Iran sanctions with the Iranians busily producing fissionable material and coming closer to actually having a nuclear capability with every passing week. So I think that there's always going to be a reason for the utilities to take a wait-and-see approach. But I think that you get to a point where the majority of our nuclear power plants are in regulated markets, meaning that they are overseen by public utility commissions. And those public utility commissions are the ones that grow very uncomfortable with thin inventories. They like to know where the fuel's coming from for the next couple of years. Frankly, I'm surprised they've let them get this low.
Why hasn't the US government or the DOE, Department of Energy, talked to you? If there's something coming out this week with the working group, you're one of the two petitioners, right? You're the guy that kicked this thing off. Why are they not talking to you more? Have they got everything they need from you? Why are they, I'm just intrigued as to the process.
When it first started back at the very beginning of August, we knew when the reports were, they broke the working group up into 4 separate groups. And one was for uranium, one was for conversion, one was for enrichment, one was for fabrication. And we, of course, weighed in. We formed what we called our industry core working group that represented every phase of the fuel cycle. And so what we did is we submitted our own report. We also had the advantage of working with a very good defense contractor at the time that gave us a good idea of what perhaps the federal government's needs would be in terms of nuclear fuel in the 10 years to come. And so we were able to really tailor our industry core working group recommendations that we submitted to the nuclear fuel working group, the president's working group. And we also tailored it with respect to the programs that we knew that they had available, whether that's the Assured Supply Act or the Defense Production Act. And so we were able to state to them, look, here's a way that you can support the nuclear fuel cycle, whether it's the uranium producers or the converters, and here's where you can get the money, here's where it's readily available by the president, by presidential decree, would not require appropriations. We were a bit surprised, frankly, when the first thing to come out of the working group was the 10-year appropriation of $150 million. Now, that's something that has to survive the appropriations and budgeting process. Whether or not that comes out the way we want it to, we don't know. But we'd sure like to see the rest of the report, because what we're hopeful of is that there's short-term relief in there. And what I mean by that are either tax credits that we would have that would level the playing field between us and wind and solar, and even natural gas to a limited extent. So we would like to see some short-term activity there. Other things that we know are part of the some of the short-term recommendations that have been made are that they would buy, for example, our inventories. Well, there's only two companies that have inventories right now, ourselves and Energy Fuels, and buy those inventories at above current market prices. That would provide short-term relief, and it would serve to replenish the diminishing government stores that, I mean, let's face it, we've been living off of, and we've been consistently depleting Cold War inventories for some time now. And so it's, it would be a way for them to bring in material instantly, give us short-term relief, while we're watching some of the other recommendations play out.
Okay,